Part 35. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 341. The woman sat in the dark corner, glanced at the candle, then stood up with a small package on her back, and came to the Buddha statue. My concubine, Zhongju, used to travel around Zuzhu, a charlatan, helping to treat illnesses and so on. I just went to the capital and am on my way back. Seeing that the young master is carrying weapons, he is also a charlatan. Su Buling was slightly surprised, and raised his hands and clasped his fists. I'm Su Shan, the Jianghu people gave me the nickname Eagle Finger Sanren. I used to walk around Chang'an. This time I went on a trip and just came here. I didn't expect the girl to be a doctor. The woman who called herself Zhongju pursed her lips and smiled gently. I have never heard of the young master's name. I am really ignorant. When Nightingale saw that her young master blindly reported his family status, he also followed suit. In the next night, fiercely. Snap! The folding fan immediately tapped Nightingale on the head. Su Buling had a strange look on his face, and almost failed to maintain his image of an upright gentleman. Zhongju's determination was pretty good, but he covered his red lips with his aqua blue sleeves and chuckled, his eyebrows curved. My little sister is so beautiful. Nightingale nodded seriously and then said, Sister Zhong is more beautiful. Su Buling chuckled softly, since the girl is from the Jianghu, she naturally has some knowledge. She has such an outstanding appearance and dares to walk alone. I think she is quite capable. Zhongju did not deny it, and there was a bit of humility in his eyes. In the world of martial arts, I rely on my ability. Although I am a doctor, I can kill people if I can save them. I still have some means of self-defense. Su Buletinling was dubious, and Nightingale was also dubious and asked, Sister, is she very skilled in martial arts? Generally. The world is more about human nature and sophistication. High martial arts is indeed important, but those who can thrive in the world are all talented people. Just like the nearby Wudane mountain, Chen Daizai is practicing on the mountain every day, and those who move around are all three masters. Uncle Chen Daoning has no martial arts skills, but the weight of his words is not much worse than that of Chen Daizai. Su Buling nodded lightly, feeling that this was very reasonable. Even in the temple, it was not the tens of thousands of enemies in the military formation who decided the direction of the whole world. No matter how high one's martial arts skills were, how could a lonely person with no moral integrity be able to do anything in the world? What a storm! The girl is quite advanced and has learned a lesson. There, just talking casually. Zhongju sat down for a while, his eyes suddenly stopped on Su Buling's face. He looked at it for a while, and frowned slightly. Young master, is he poisoned? Su Buling was stunned. He didn't expect this woman to have such vicious eyesight. He still had some subtle dragon-locking goo on him, which was specially left to bully the baby. He couldn't feel it even if he wasn't paying attention. He didn't expect that this woman would see it at just one glance. Can detect. I was poisoned before and it's been resolved. It's harmless. Zhongju's expression was slightly serious, like a doctor seeing a terminally ill patient, and he got a little closer. Can I allow you to check the master's pulse? Seeing that the other party had good intentions after all, Su Buling stretched out his hand. Zhongju's slender fingers pressed on Su Buling's wrist through his robe. After feeling it for a moment, his face became more solemn. What you have in your hands is the long-lost dragon-locking goo. Su Buling didn't expect that she could actually see it, and thought for a moment. Yes, it was untied a few days ago. Zhongju shook his head. The locking dragon goo is extremely overbearing. No one in history has been able to completely undo it. Although the young master has somehow managed to get rid of most of it, there are still some left in his body that are difficult to get rid of. And even if there are also big hidden dangers in getting rid of the poison. Su Buling was tortured terribly by the dragon Lokgu, so he was half convinced. What does the girl mean by this? Zhongju's face was extremely solemn, it's like a white cloth stained with ink. If you want to wash it clean, it will be faster at the beginning, but at the end of the wash, there will always be some residue. Even if the human eye cannot see it, it will be difficult for the white cloth to return to its original state. The young master has been poisoned for a long time, which has damaged his internal organs. After detoxification, he has to warm and nourish his body with secret methods. Otherwise, no abnormalities will be seen in a short period of time. When people reach middle age, they will be unrestrained and inactive. Wait, there will be endless trouble. Don't lift. Su Buling sat up a little straighter. After all, this was related to the lifelong sexual well-being of the baby and his aunt. With the attitude of following the doctor's orders and preferring to believe what he has or not, he said softly. Well, that makes sense. Does the girl know how to be gentle? Zhongju looked at Su Buling for a few times, but hesitated to speak, looking embarrassed. A doctor should help the world by hanging a pot, and he cannot ignore death. But after all, I am a Jianghu person. Some of the things taught in the teacher's sect cannot be passed on to others. It's not that I don't want to save the young master, well, I think the young master is a good person. Are you interested in medical skills? Su Buling blinked. What does the girl mean? Zhongju's face showed a bit of sadness, and he sighed softly. In recent years, the only person who has locked the dragon goo is Prince Su. His surname is also Su. Looking at his appearance, it is not difficult to guess that the young master is who. I am just a doctor who travels around the world, but I am also determined to save the people of the world from suffering from stubborn diseases. If the young master wants to practice medicine, I can teach him the secret method to detoxify him and help him inherit the throne in the future. It can benefit the people of a place. Su Buling was a little confused. He looked at the woman he met for the first time and thought for a while. Apprenticing to a teacher is a big deal. I just met the girl. It's too hasty to say this. It's not convenient here. How about the girl follow me to Danjiangkou and discuss it carefully on the boat? By the way, I can treat her well and show my friendship to the landlord. Zhongju was naturally not in a hurry. I am a traveler, and the young master has a noble status. If you don't mind, it's okay for me to go and have a look. Su Buling nodded lightly. Although he was very confident in his body, he did not have medical skills. After what Zhongju said, he was really worried. What if Zhongju told the truth? From invincible in the world to invincible in the East. Zhongju was very satisfied with Su Buling's reaction, and then comforted him. Master, there is no need to worry. As long as I am here, Master will be fine and can continue to travel in peace. Then I'll bother you, girl. Zhongju thought for a while and then said, if we go to Danjiangkou, we will just pass by Jinsi Gorge. Master Kingxiu, the master of Wudane killer god Chendaizai, have you met the old immortal Kingxiu? Nightingale hugged her knees and sat in front of Su Buling. She no longer looked down upon Zhongju and responded. The leader of Wudane Mountain is very senior in the world. Rumor has it that he has risen to prominence. He hasn't shown his face in many years. Do you know him, senior? Zhongju smiled warmly and looked like an elder. You can be considered acquaintance. I know that his old man is repairing near Jinsi Gorge. If you want to see him, I can guide you. When Su Buling heard this, his eyes really showed a bit of surprise. People like the old master of Uulu Mountain, the northern Qi imperial master, and the old headmaster of Wudane Mountain were basically considered semi-immortals. Ordinary people might not even meet them. I've never heard of it, so it's not easy to find someone who can help guide me. If the girl can really guide the way, such an expert from this world will naturally pay a visit. Young master, you don't have to be polite. I happen to be on my way. I'll take you there tomorrow. But if the old man refuses to see you, there's nothing I can do about it. That's natural. How can a true God be so easy to see? After chatting for a few words, the night was already dark. Zhongju didn't get too close. He got up and walked back to the corner of the ruined temple to close his eyes and rest. Su Buling and Nightingale naturally didn't bother them, and leaned against the Buddha statue with their eyes closed in concentration. I have doubts about whether Zhongju's words are true or false, but if he can really take him to find the old headmaster of Wudang Mountain tomorrow, then this woman may really have something. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 342. The autumn rain didn't stop until early in the morning. After all, the three people in the ruined temple met for the first time, so they were still wary and basically didn't sleep soundly. When the sky turned bright and the heavy rain stopped, Su Buling put away the blanket, took Nightingale, and Zhongju left the ruined temple. Su Buling brought the horse over, hung the long spear on the gun hook, got on the horse and continued riding towards the south. Zhongju was wearing a skirt, sitting sideways on the red horse, walking in front of Nightingale. Under the morning light, the skin looks snow-white and crystal clear, a bit dreamy but not sickly. It is a very healthy baby white, like fresh and juicy tofu. Nightingale had been staying in the library since she was a child and didn't get much exposure to the sun. Her face was already very white. After a few comparisons, she couldn't help but admire. If it is increased by 1 point, it is too long; if it is reduced by 1 point, it is too short; if it is powdered, it will be too white; if it is applied with vermilion, it will be too red. The eyebrows are like green feathers, the muscles are like white snow, the waist is like a bunch of silk, and the teeth are like shells. Sister Joan, are you following this? What does he look like in the book? Zhongju pursed his lips and smiled. People are raised, and they are properly warmed and nourished with medicinal foods and other foods. As long as you persevere, you will not look old even when you are 60 years old. Nightingale carefully wrote it down, thought for a moment, and then asked doubtfully, with Sister Zhong's appearance, she will definitely be one of the 8 beauties. Why haven't I heard of your name? Could it be that you are already married? Zhongju shook his head. It's just a false reputation. Fighting for fame and wealth is not conducive to self-cultivation. I am obsessed with medicine and have never paid attention to these things. Oh. Nightingale nodded in a learned manner. After Su Buling listened for a long time, he couldn't help but feel a bit like making friends with this woman with good looks and good looks. Let's not talk about the issue of not engaging in sexual activities. If you really know how to maintain your health and beauty, Aunt Lu will definitely treat her as a treasure. The autumn wind swept through the mountains and forests, and the 3 horses galloped on the deserted official road. They chatted about trivial things along the way, and gradually they became familiar with them. In the afternoon, the 3 of them arrived near Jinsi Gorge, 100 miles away. The scenery of Jinsi Gorge is beautiful, and more people are visiting in autumn. There are many Taoist temples built on the mountain, and pilgrims and people from all walks of life can be seen everywhere on the road. Zhongju took a curtain hat from the side of the horse and put it on his head. Su Buling just thought it was because of his outstanding appearance and didn't care. After arriving at Jinsi Gorge, Zhongju drove his horse ahead, walking on the path beside the dense forest of the mountain stream, walking more than 5 miles into the mountain, and came to the bottom of an unremarkable hill. There is a stream at the foot of the mountain, which is covered with bamboo. There is no road up the mountain, and the surrounding area is deserted. If someone hadn't led the way, it would be impossible to imagine that there were people living up there. Zhongju jumped off the horse, stood by the road, raised his finger and pointed to the place with the thickest bamboo on the mountain. This is Shiyanzai, where Master Kingxiu lives in seclusion. Wudang and I have some small festivals, so we won't go up there. Don't tell me, sir, that I brought you here." Su Buling raised his eyes and took a look. The journey was not too far. In order to prevent an ambush from above, he took a long branch from the side of the horse and climbed up through the rugged and roadless mountains with Nightingale. Zhongju tied the horse to the side of the road, walked to the pool in the valley, sat down on the big rock, and gently raised his hand. The little sparrows mingling with the birds in the sky flew up to the mountains chirping. If the mountain is not high, it will be famous if there are immortals; if the water is not deep, if there is a dragon, it will be spiritual. As a famous family in the world, Wuodane Mountain has numerous experts. There is an endless stream of pilgrims going up and down the mountain every day, and there are countless stupid young people who come here to look for famous teachers. Jianghu people searched across the mountains and ridges, and many hermits hiding in Wuodane Mountain were dug out at regular intervals. As time went by, the hermits who devoted themselves to spiritual practice became more and more remote, and gradually dispersed into the mountains and fields around Wuodane. Xi'an village in Jinsi Gorge is rumored to be the place where a sage from Wuodane attained enlightenment. Many people have heard of this place, but few people know where it really is, and those who can find it are definitely not ordinary people. At dusk, the red sun hangs on the mountains in the west. A small bamboo building was built among the dense bamboo forest on the mountain. Next to it was a vegetable garden, surrounded by a fence. Except that the place was too remote, it was no different from an ordinary farmyard. It was getting late, and there was a recliner on the ground outside the bamboo building. The real man Kingxiu, dressed in an old Taoist robe, was holding a teapot in his hand, swaying with his eyes closed. If he hadn't picked up the teapot from time to time and took a sip, he would still have looked at it. Thought he was dead. There is a small bench next to the recliner. Lin Yuzong, the young head of Hutu Mountain in Xiangyang, a wealthy family in Chudi, is sitting on the bench and is talking respectfully. "Old immortal, I am one generation behind Dao Kang Chen. It is against the rules of the world to come to your door and declare a challenge. There are already 6 out of 10 military commanders. I only have one military commander in the Great Chu. If we don't hurry up, all of us will be killed. Being robbed by other places is a big deal. As the saying goes, only Chu has talent, and good swordsmanship is popular. It is also located in the hinterland of the Central Plains. It has been the center of the world since ancient times. The Lin family of Hutu Mountain and the Cao family of Junshan Island are all great families with a long history. In the past, when the great Qi judged the heroes of the world, half of them were from the Chu land, and the other half was shared by the people of the world. The ancestors of the Lin family also came from there are strange people who want to dominate the world. Following the iron eagle hunting in the court, all the aristocratic families were affected. The Cao family directly sealed the sword and cut off the inheritance. The Lin family sought refuge with the king of Chu. Naturally, they were restrained in their behavior and did not dare to be too public. Their reputation gradually in decline. When the younger generation talks about gun users, they almost forget about the Lin family in Hutishan just by knowing about Liuhaman Xuechenzi and Beijiang Chenchong. Now the court is going to select 10 martial champions. The Lin family under the king of Chu naturally has no chance to be personally awarded by the imperial pen, and they are embarrassed to be shameless like the Tang family in Yuzhu, picking a soft persimmon. If you want to get the real martial champion, you have to find a recognized master in the martial arts world to fight and prove your strength, and then you can go to the capital to receive the plaque of the martial champion. Lin Yuzong is in his early 20s. His talent has surpassed his father, but according to the martial arts generation, he should be of the same generation as Su Buling and Mei Kushan. Finding a martial arts bandit like Zulu to fight to prove your strength may result in your family being wiped out if you are not careful. It is a taboo to make enemies casually, running to challenge an elder. It is not shameful if you lose, but if you win, the other party's reputation will be ruined. No matter whether you win or lose, you owe the other party a big favor. In the martial arts world, people still pay attention to human relationships. If you don't give enough face and money, why should others give you a reputation? Lin Yuzong is from Chu, so he has close ties with Wudang Mountain. After searching for a long time, he finally came to Wudang Mountain, thinking of asking Chen Daozai's master to be the notary public, so that he and Chen Daozai can fight in the name of a test. He certainly can't beat Wudang's killing god Chen Daozai, but he is confident that he can hold out for 10 moves, and with the Wudang master standing by to be fair, he can tell others about it with both face and substance, and the people in the world will also be convinced. Unfortunately, Lin Yuzong had been saying good things in Xi'an village for 3 or 4 days, but the old immortal in front of him looked like he had nothing to do with it. He kept saying the same thing. In the martial arts world, there is no second to none. Just go and fight with the Taoist priest. If you can win, it's a skill. If you can't, the Taoist priest won't kill you. It's pointless to go through so many twists and turns. Old immortal, I'm a junior. I can't go to Wudang Mountain with a gun to ask Taoist Master Chen to come out. Then go back and hone your skills for another 10 years. When you can't hold it back anymore and dare to go to Wudang Mountain with a gun to beat up the Taoist priest, this Wu Kuei is legitimate. Alas, old immortal, don't joke. The order of seniority should not be messed up. Even if I am 80 years old, I will not be disrespectful to my elders. I heard that Chen Chong went to Tianshan alone to worship the moon platform. If nothing unexpected happens, he will definitely be the next Wu Kuei. In our Chu area, only Taoist Chen is the leader. The people in the martial arts world are stabbing us in the back. Yuzong, your mouth is suitable for being a monk chanting sutras. If a guest comes, you can drive him out, and I will help you say something. Kingxiu Genren raised his hand and shook it without opening his eyes. Lin Yuzong saw that the old Taoist finally gave in, and his eyes lit up. He listened attentively and found that someone had indeed entered the bamboo forest. He thought it was just a fly from the martial arts world who came to bother the elders, so he stood up and pulled out a spear from the fence. Don't worry, old immortal, I will be back soon. The people in the martial arts world must keep their words. Don't bluff me. As he said that, he ran into the dense bamboo forest. Kingxiu Genren opened his eyes, put down the teapot and shook his head, then stood up and slowly walked into the bamboo building, and began to search through the boxes and cabinets for medicine for injuries. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 343. The autumn wind in the mountain forest is solemn, and the dense bamboo leaves rustle overhead. Occasionally, a small animal runs across the thick layer of bamboo leaves, making a series of noises. Su Buling held a long tree wrapped in black cloth and walked slowly through the endless bamboo forest, listening carefully to the movements around him to ensure that he would not be ambushed by anyone who wanted to. The nightingale didn't carry a weapon. She broke off a small branch and took it in her hand, poking it back and forth on the piled leaves. Sir, this place is inaccessible. It doesn't look like there are people there. That Zhongju came too suddenly. Although there seems to be nothing wrong, there must be a monster when things go wrong. Su Buling walked slowly and said with a smile. I can't say for sure, but it doesn't look like she has any malicious intentions. Even if she approaches deliberately, she probably wants to settle down in the palace because of my identity. There are never too many customers, as long as she has real ability and dares to raise a price I can afford it, but I'm afraid it's just a eloquent embroidered pillow with gold and jade on the outside covered in wadding. Nightingale nodded and said, Genren Kingxiu is probably 70 or 80 years old. He was born in the previous dynasty and even met the last emperor of Deqi. I saw it in the book and thought he had died long ago. Su Buling raised his hand gently, "Be polite. If we are really in the bamboo forest, such an expert hears it and has to kick us out." Nightingale thought about it, so she didn't say anything more and continued to look for gods in the huge sea of bamboo. The two of them walked not far into the bamboo forest. Footsteps sounded from a distance. Su Buring looked deep into the bamboo forest. "There are really people." Nightingale immediately became alert and stared around cautiously. Su Buling listened carefully, and saw that the other party's footsteps were not covered up, and he strode towards the side. With the naked eye, he could see the swaying bamboo leaves in front of him. If he didn't hear only 2 feet, he would have thought that a tiger and bear were rushing over from there. He fang xiao xiao, retreat quickly. Soon, a loud shout came from the bamboo forest ahead, and a young man with a gun appeared in the bamboo forest. The man was wearing a black gold-rimmed robe, with a jade crown on his head, sword-like eyebrows, and tiger eyes. He looked dignified. He was holding a silver-headed spear. The barrel of the gun was dark and made of excellent workmanship. The complex was red and burned into the fire. At a glance, you could tell it was a spear. A good gun with quite a history. Su Buling came to visit the immortal and asked. Naturally he was very polite, raised his hands and cupped his fists, smiling. "I dare to ask, brother, can Master Kingxiu do his cultivation here?" "No, come down the mountain quickly, don't wait for me to do it myself." Lin Yuzong was still in a hurry to go back and talk to the old god. He had no intention of talking nonsense with Su Buletin. He laid his spear across the bamboo forest and raised his hand to coax people. Su Buling frowned slightly and said to himself, "If you want to see the real Buddha in the world, you have to go through the door god first. I'm afraid this is the door god." Thinking of this, Su Buling didn't say any more nonsense. He picked up the long stick wrapped in black cloth and untied the black cloth. "Brother, if you can send me out, I'll have nothing to say, but if you can't, please help lead the way." "Oh." Lin Yuzong was stunned. He didn't expect this scholar-dressed knight-errant to be so crazy. He dared to carry a gun without even asking his name, and he wasn't afraid of kicking a metal plate? "Do you know who I am?" "I don't care who you are." Lin Yuzong almost choked to death at these words. He was obviously a little angry. The spear in his hand shook and made a pop sound. Then he held the spear in both hands and the tip of the spear was level with the tip of his nose. "Good boy, look for a fight yourself, but don't blame me for not warning you." Nightingale stood behind Su Buling and glanced. The starting position of Lin's gun in Hudishan. The Lin's gun is different from the Liuhe gun. It is famous for its dexterity and cunning. It is divided into 12 positions. Lin Yuzong was slightly surprised and snorted. "It's quite discerning." But before she finished speaking, Lin Yuzong saw the scholar in white standing 20 steps away raised his hand to stop the maid's words, then threw aside the black cloth wrapping the dragon-patterned long spear, and shook it fiercely with one hand, 2 feet. Shuofeng trembled lightly like the sound of a sword, echoing in the sea of bamboos, then he held the spear in both hands, the same starting position of the Lin family gun, and was not half inferior to Lin Yuzong in terms of fire. Lin Yuzong was stunned for a moment, then got angry and used the Lin family gun in front of the Lin family. Who was he looking down on? The bamboo forest became quiet, leaving only the rustle of bamboo leaves. 2 figures, one black and one white, stood among the dense bamboo sea, 20 steps apart from each other, keeping the same posture and looking at each other. Nightingale ran back dozens of steps to make way for the opening, thought for a moment, took out a copper coin from her sleeve, and flicked it into the air. Buzzing. The copper coin rotated rapidly, rose to a high altitude and then fell, landing where the two people's eyes met. Bang. 2 loud noises sounded at the same time, startling the sparrows in the bamboo forest. The 2 figures originally standing at both ends suddenly appeared on the path where the copper coins fell. Jiao Feng passed through the square hole of the copper coin and split the whirling copper coin into two. Lin Yuzong's eyes were extremely focused, and he fired his gun at the same time. He was no slower than Su Buling, but Su Buling's weapon was longer. Seeing that the direct thrust was bound to be useless, Lin Yuzong immediately changed his tactics and swept across the thousands of troops. The strong wind brought by the spear rolled up the bamboo leaves on the ground, like a big wave hitting Su Buling. The tip of the spear was on the top of the wave. The dense green bamboo next to him turned a blind eye. The bamboo looked intact after being swept by the spear, but it had been split into two. Seeing the opponent change his moves, Su Buletinling stepped heavily on the ground. His white robes were carried by the strong wind, and his whole body instantly changed from rushing forward to leaping vertically, without any buffering force, as if he was scratching on the ground. A right angle. Ah! Lin Yuzong fired his gun and missed, then heard a loud roar from above. He looked up and saw Su Buling, who had leaped to the top of the bamboo forest, holding the long spear with both hands and slightly turning it around behind him. He swung the spear into a half-moon with great force and slapped it down with the momentum of a mountain. This move was obviously not the Lin family spear, but the killing power was definitely terrifying. Lin Yuzong's expression was slightly condensed, and he raised the spear with both hands without hesitation, accurately blocking the connection between the spear tip and the spear shaft to prevent the spear shaft from continuing to chop his head with the spear tip with its excellent elasticity. This defense was not a problem at all. The place that could be blocked was the front end of the long spear, just like the end of a whip, which was the place with the greatest force. Clang! The crisp sound of metal colliding shook the bamboo forest, making Nightingale's ears numb, and he quickly covered his ears with his hands. Lin Yuzong raised his hand to take Su Buling's blow. His boots immediately sank more than 2 inches into the mud, but his limbs were like pillars of jade, steady and not even shaking. But the force was too inhuman, beyond Lin Yuzong's expectation. When he took the gun forcibly, his blood surged, his face flushed instantly, and he quickly lifted the long spear on the gun barrel, stepped back a few steps, and said in surprise, "Who are you?" Su Buling was also a little shocked. Since he came to this world, the one who felt the best in fighting was Zoyze. If he shot him with this gun, Zoyze would definitely kneel down. The guy in front of him didn't even shake, and his ability was really great. After a move, both sides dispelled their contempt in their hearts. Su Buling raised the long spear again, his expression more serious. "Suzhou, Su Buling, who are you?" Lin Yuzong was stunned, obviously a little surprised, but did not question it. After all, people can be impersonated, but Kung Fu cannot be impersonated. "Are you the contemporary Qing Kui?" The emperor personally appointed him, but he didn't bring his nameplate. After Lin Yuzong confirmed that everything was correct, his face became serious, but there was still some excitement in his eyes. The emperor of Dayu decided to select the world's martial arts champions, and there were only 10 places, each of which was a master-level figure who was invincible. He was too young, and it was not appropriate to fight anyone, and he had no confidence. And the slightly lower-level Qing Kui, that is, the first person of the younger generation, only had 1 place. Su Buling was injured at first, and it was against the rules to fight for it. Later, he directly caused a big mess and patted his butt and returned to Suzhou. The people in the martial arts world would definitely not dare to go to the Suwang mansion to challenge the prince, because the status difference was too great, and they were not people of the same class at all. Originally, the people in the martial arts world thought that they would definitely not be able to snatch it away, so they could only forget the title of Qing Kui. Otherwise, Lin Yuzong would not challenge to snatch the 10 martial arts champions whose confidence was not good enough. But now Su Buling actually came to the door, that's different. As long as Su Buling is defeated now, and there is King Xugenren's fairness, he can definitely take over the title of contemporary King Kui. No matter how small the reputation of King Kui is, it is still better than Tang Qiao, the shame of the 10 Wu Kui. After all, it is a golden plaque written by the emperor himself. There are only 11 genuine Wu Kui in the world. Thinking of this, Lin Yuzong retreated back to 20 steps away with a spear in hand, and said in a deep voice. Lin Yuzong, Hutu Mountain, Xiangyang. Please teach me. Su Buling nodded, it's real, brother Lin, don't be careless. Lin Yuzong frowned slightly, holding the gun tightly, and wanted to ask was it fake just now, but in the end he didn't say anything, but was very alert and didn't say anything, ready to go. Nightingale watched with relish, took out another copper coin and flicked it into the air, staring at it intently, without even blinking. Buzz buzz buzz. The copper coin rose into the air again and then fell between the two. Ah! The two men rushed forward again, but this time the situation was completely different. Su Buling's speed increased several times, and he stepped hard on the ground full of fallen leaves and made 2 pits. His body turned into a white shadow and rushed out. Wherever he passed, sand and stones flew, and some weeds were bent by the strong wind and stuck to the ground. Ding! The sound of the spear roaring like a dragon, and the sound of the copper coin being pierced in half by the spear tip followed closely. Lin Yuzong's face suddenly changed, with a bit of incomprehensible confusion, but his hands did not slow down at all. He dodged the spear sideways and raised the spear to stab the somewhat unclear white shadow, and then... bang! A black shadow flew out like a broken sack, knocking off a large piece of green bamboo, with a continuous squeaky sound, and the red tassel spear turned several big circles in the air. After Su Buling sent Lin Yuzong away with a stick, he raised his hand to catch the long spear that fell from the air and tilted his head slightly. Let's go visit the old immortal. Nightingale was still a little reluctant, and trotted behind Su Buling and took the long spear. This should be the tiger-headed spear handed down by the Lin family in Hutu Mountain. It has been passed down for hundreds of years. Can I take it back and put it in the ancestral hall? It's just a sparring match, not a trophy. How can I surrender the gun? Su Buling walked into the bamboo forest full of mess, pulled out the unconscious Lin Yuzong, and walked into the depths holding his belt. 10,000 words updated. Big guys, please vote for the monthly ticket and recommendation ticket, thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 344. As the sun sets over the mountain, the sky gradually darkens. The faint firelight in the depths of the bamboo forest guides the road. The winding path leads to a quiet place. Not far from the bamboo forest, a small bamboo building suddenly opens up before your eyes. There is a small stove burning in front of the bamboo building, with a teapot on it, and 3 small benches next to it. The white-haired old man in an old Taoist robe was leaning on a recliner with his eyes closed. After Su Buling walked out of the bamboo forest, he raised his hand and pointed to the bench next to which there was medicine for bruises. Meet the old Taoist priest. Hello, Grandpa. Su Buling carried Lin Yuzong to the bench, placed Lin Yuzong on it, picked up the bruise medicine next to him, and began to treat the unconscious Lin Yuzong's injuries. Nightingale went on a long trip for the first time and met a big shot she had seen in the book. Naturally, she was a little embarrassed. She sat down on the small bench and took a look secretly. The Taoist swordsman for comparison. Su Buling was actually a little curious. He thought he was an immortal with immortal demeanor, but when he saw that King Xu's appearance was no different from that of an ordinary old Taoist priest, he said with a smile. I asked the old Taoist priest not to blame me for coming in without telling me. Taoist priest King Xu picked up the teapot and took a sip. It's not the first time I've been presumptuous. Back then, I sent someone to Suzhou to call you here to be my apprentice. It would be better for you to just kick them out. Your vision is as high as the sky and you don't look down on this small place. Now you're running away on your own. What are you doing here? Su Buletinling's expression froze slightly. He was really crazy when he was a child and drove away many senior people in the world. It seemed that he had offended people. I was young and ignorant at that time. I happened to pass by Jinsi Gorge this time. I heard that the old Taoist priest was doing a cleansing here, so I definitely wanted to pay a visit. Children in the world like to look for famous teachers to ask for advice on this or that, especially those who are as old as me. They treat every question as if it were a law of heaven. In fact, there is no need. They are all human beings, just like me, the old Taoist. I just live here to retire when I can no longer run. Martial arts are definitely not as good as those who are young and strong. As for how to behave in the world, people who know it don't need to teach it, but it is useless to teach people who don't know how to live forever. Kung Fu, no need to ask, I haven't figured it out even with my feet in the ground. Nightingale listened for a long time, but she understood the meaning. Don't ask anything, I don't know. Grandpa, they all say that having an elder in the family is like having a treasure. An expert like you has more experience and understanding. Even if you don't ask anything, you will benefit a lot from just chatting. Taoist Master Kingsu opened his eyes, looked at the little nightingale sitting neatly next to him, and chuckled. That's okay. I'll be fine if I stay here anyway. The little friend I was chatting with has also been knocked down by you. Just say what you want to say. Nightingale sat up a little straighter. Grandpa, I heard that you and Eunuch Chia, the chief steward of Chang'an City, once fought in front of Emperor Xiaozong, and the battle turned the mountains and rivers into discoloration. However, according to the records in the book, it seems that you did not lose. Even though Eunuch Chia didn't lose, was it possible that you were tied at that time? Master Kingsu took a sip of tea and said, it was written by a meddlesome person. When General Su broke Chang'an, I was only 18 or 19, and Eunuch Chia was 7 or 8 years younger than me. I had never met Eunuch Chia at that time. Later, Eunuch Chia I have never left the imperial city, nor have I entered it, so I still don't know what he looks like. Nightingale nodded thoughtfully, a little disappointed. Then don't you know which one of you is better? What a pity. In terms of martial arts alone, Eunuch Chia may be more powerful. After all, he is still guarding the palace. I have been living in seclusion here since I was 50, and now I am 80. I have almost forgotten how to use a sword. I can't compare. Then who do you think is the most powerful among the contemporary martial arts masters? Master Kingsu closed his eyes and thought for a moment, then shook his head. It's hard to say. The world has been silent for 10 years, which is a generation. It's hard to tell who is high and low without a fight. But in terms of talent, among the current players, Li Hanzhong is the most powerful. In just 3 or 4 years, from a weak scholar to a powerful man, I have no idea what it will look like in the future. In the future, your young master, Mei Kushan, the disciple of the old guy in Yuelu Mountain, should definitely be in the top 10 and compete for the top 3. What about me? Nightingale sat upright, full of energy. Master Kingsu looked at it for a few times and shook his head. The world is divided into yin and yang. It is the way of heaven. Since ancient times, men have hunted and women have gathered mulberries. Women have been disadvantaged in martial arts. Martial arts require too much physical strength. To reach the top 10 in the world, it is even less. It's a mistake. It's more difficult for a woman to become a martial arts master than for a daughter to become a top scholar. You are already extremely talented. As long as you study hard, it is possible to establish a sect and become a master. But don't even think about Lin, who has just been a martial arts master. Yuzong, have you seen that there can't be one good person out of 100,000 people, and you can't even stand it when you meet a real martial artist? You can figure out how far behind you are. Nightingale frowned slightly and glanced at Lin Yuzong, who was lying half dead on the long board. Is he very powerful? Su Buling applied some wound medicine, wiped his hands and sat down on the small bench. Of course he's very powerful. He's only 27 or 80. I'm afraid he's not far behind Tang Jiao among the 10 military leaders. As long as he works hard enough and has some luck, he may not be able to join the 10 military leaders in 10 years. Master Kingxiu nodded. Lin Yuzong has a good foundation, but his character is a little bad. Young people are easy to break if they are too sharp, but they can't penetrate if their sharpness is too soft. Lin Yuzong hid his sharpness too early, and he was too young. I began to think that I was smooth and comprehensive, and it was not enough to think before and after the action. People who practiced martial arts thought so much about what to do. They fought first and then saluted. If you have the ability, the other party will naturally be convinced. If you don't have the ability, it will be useless to say it nicely. Unfortunately, these things, you have to understand it yourself. Others say it's useless. Su Buling nodded seriously. I have learned the lesson. Master Kingxiu glanced at Su Buling and thought for a while. You've changed a lot, kid. You were a typical example of being too sharp back then. I didn't like you at first, but your talent is so good. The last one you had was Zhou Jixian, the god of war who founded the Northern Qi dynasty, whom I haven't met in hundreds of years. I hesitated again and again, but still let people. I invited you here, thinking about cultivating yourself on Wudang Mountain and seeing if you could be polished, but you refused. Su Buletinling looked embarrassed and smiled softly. Master Kingxiu held the small teapot and sighed. I calculated at that time, I'm afraid you won't live to be 20 years old. Sure enough, something happened later, and you were infected by the dragon Lok Gu and became disabled. But Tianzong is a genius. Focusing on the word Tianzong, I really didn't expect you to be able to withstand this disaster. Not only did you become more energetic, but your temperament also changed a lot. If you are not arrogant or impatient, I am afraid you can really take the world's martial arts to a higher level. It's a pity that you made the mistake of coming from a prince's family. Your starting point was too high for the small fish pond of Jianghu. It would be a bad thing to devote yourself to martial arts without caring about the people's livelihood. Otherwise, I, an old man like me, will beg and demand to accept you as my apprentice. No matter how high your martial arts skills are, you are still a human being. You can't really become a god. Even Zhou Jixian was buried in Zongnan Mountain in the end. Su Buling said this, suddenly remembering the rumors about the world that Zhongli Chuchu had mentioned, and he was curious at the moment. Ask. I have heard that Zhou Jixian left 3 volumes of books. The first 2 volumes are true, but the last volume has not been confirmed. Some people in the world say that it is called the Tongtian Baodian. If you collect a few jade pendants, you can found the clue. Does the old Taoist know about this? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 345. Master Kingxiu thought for a moment while holding the small teapot, shook his head and smiled. The world is too big to be sure. But Zhou Jixian must have left 3 volumes of books. The last volume is his lifelong martial arts experience. Before Emperor Xiaozong broke into Chang'an, I went to look for it once, but unfortunately it was stolen. I don't know whose hands it fell into. As for the 4 pieces of jade, they were probably the initiation gifts given by Zhou Zhe to his 4 disciples hundreds of years ago. Except for the piece passed down from the family of Prince Zhou of the Northern Qi dynasty, the others were sent back and forth over hundreds of years and scattered to all parts of the world. When the ancestors of the Cao family in Yueyang were in the Qi dynasty in the previous dynasty, they won a bunch of sword tassels from a sword discussion. There was a jade buckle on it, which was hung on the Cao family's Zanlu sword. It is still enshrined in the ancestral hall. I heard that the old man in Yuelu Mountain also had one on his hand, which seemed to be a hairpin, but that old man was a real god, and it was harder to find than me. I have never heard of the remaining one, I don't know where it is. Hairpin. Su Buletinling nodded thoughtfully and turned to ask. The Cao family is also a wealthy family in swordsmanship. Zulu Cao has been a three-legged family for hundreds of years. Although the head of the family, Cao Kujian, is not as good as Zhu Kishan and my grandfather, the Cao family's background is still there. 10 years ago, the family suddenly sealed the sword and retreated from the world. It's a pity to switch to selling crabs. There are many rumors in the world, and some even say that the Cao family is acting as a conspiracy. Does the old Taoist know the reason? Master Kingxiu sighed, it's an old story. It's not good to expose someone's shortcomings, and it's not easy to evaluate a poor person. Cao Jiajian is famous for its fast. What he pursues is to be strong and swift, and he will have no regrets when he encounters someone who has no regrets. Uxian's matter is just like your uncle Liu Beiming. He can't think about it for the rest of his life. If he thinks about it, he will no longer be a Jianghu person. Cao Kujian is a serious Jianghu person. I gave him advice a few times back then. There is nothing wrong with him, but he can't help himself in the Jianghu. Some things are wrong no matter how he chooses them. You can't blame Cao Kujian. You worship Ning Yuhi as your master, so you should know Ning Qingyi. When something happened to the little girl Qingyi, it was Cao Kujian who secretly came here to intercede with me and saved the little girl Qingyi. Su Buling was thoughtful and was about to ask something else. Lin Yuzong, who was lying next to the corpse, coughed twice and finally recovered. Ahem. Lin Yuzong's eyes cleared up a little, then he turned over and touched his chest and head to make sure they were still there, then his face changed slightly. What the hell, old fairy, I just had a nightmare and met a fairy. As soon as he said a word, he saw Su Buling and Nightingale sitting in front of the small stove next to him, both looking at him with strange expressions. Well. The panic on Lin Yuzong's face immediately subsided, and he looked calm and calm. He raised his hands and clasped his fists. Young Master Su is indeed very skilled. He has learned a lesson. Su Buring chuckled lightly, Brother Lin is not bad either. The strongest person I have ever fought against in my life is probably Brother Lin. Lin Yuzong looked a little embarrassed. He walked to the small stove and sat down, rubbing his aching chest. Mr. Su, you, Qing Kui, are a bit unworthy of your name. With that one blow just now, you can probably hit 2 Tang Jiaos without any problem, which is enough to make you the best in the world. If I hadn't suffered such a blow myself, I would never have done it. I don't believe anyone in the world can shoot a gun so quickly. Taoist Master Kingxiu raised his hand gently, stop praising others. King Kui is King Kui. You can't be called the best in the world until you have beaten him. If you can't even beat King Kui, just go back and practice for a few more years. When will you be able to do so? Come back to Daizai once you are sure. It's too early now. Lin Yuzong could also afford to lose. After suffering a loss, he naturally saw the gap. He also gave up his ambition and raised his hand. I still don't know enough, so I'll practice again when I go back. It's often said that you can't get to know each other without fighting. Now that Mr. Su has arrived in Chu, he has pointed out Lin. No matter what, he has to fulfill his friendship as a landlord. My Lin family has a martial arts gym in Yueyang. If Mr. Su goes to Dongting Lake, he must inform him so that Mr. Lin can take care of Mr. Su. Su Buling naturally has no objection to people in the world who are both capable and good-natured. I've heard about the Lin family's guns for a long time, and I've learned a lot from them. If I go somewhere, I'll definitely pay him a visit. Lin Yuzong bothered Master Kingxiu for several days and wanted to fight Chen Daizai, but he lost so miserably to King Kui. He was really embarrassed, and he didn't have the shame to stay here and continue to look familiar. He stood up, hugged his fists, and left. He pulled out a spear and left the bamboo forest. It was almost dark, and there were still people waiting at the foot of the mountain. We couldn't spend the night here. After Su Buling chatted for a while, he stood up and said goodbye to Master Kingxiu, and took Nightingale down the mountain. On the way down the mountain, Nightingale was still a little disappointed. She walked in front of Su Buling and whispered softly. The Wudang master written in the book is a godlike figure. When he was traveling across the world, Zhu Sword Master was still playing in the mud. Why does the real person look so ordinary, almost the same as Lao Xiao? Su Buling was still thinking about the conversation just now. Hearing the words, he chuckled and said, "There is no false scholar under the reputation. If others don't do something, I will look ordinary. If I don't do something, I will look like a scholar. Furthermore, I am neither a master, a disciple, nor a relative. If you ask me to point out, I owe favors. Favors, this thing, it's troublesome to owe or be owed by others, so naturally I won't say much, and I'll be satisfied if I can meet you once." "Oh." Nightingale nodded thoughtfully and thought for a while. Sister Zongju found this place. I think she is really a decent person and not a charlatan. Yes, my character and behavior are also good. If you can invite me back to the palace to be a disciple, it will definitely be worthwhile, but it is a bit too abrupt to directly ask me to apprentice as a disciple. Sister Zhongju doesn't look very old, and her martial arts skills are definitely not as good as yours. If you don't want to take her as your master, you can ask her to take you as your master, isn't it the same? Su Buling paused. This is a good idea. It's no problem for me to teach her martial arts, but it feels a bit strange. How about telling Yuhi and letting her be Yuhi's apprentice, so that she and I can be senior and junior brothers and sisters, and we can be considered fellow disciples? Anyway, it's the same, it depends on what Sister Zhongju thinks. As they talked, the two of them went down the hill and came to the road where the horses were parked. The 3 horses were still there, but Zhongju was nowhere to be seen. Su Buling listened carefully and heard some noises coming from the pond by the roadside, so he walked to the roadside to check. Who would have thought that when he looked up, he saw a nearly dreamy scene. Beside the pond in the autumn mountains, a soft and beautiful woman in a water blue skirt sat sideways on a stone by the water, holding a bamboo stick in her hand, swinging it aimlessly above the pond. In the not very deep pond, countless unknown fish swam around in the pond with the bamboo branches as if they were spiritual. Above them, hundreds of birds spread their wings, hovering in the air and chirping, just like spectators. On the stones and trees next to them, there were squirrels, rabbits, and other small animals, squatting on the stones and raising their front legs to watch, looking very cute. And Zhongju, sitting sideways among the flying birds and small animals, was like a fairy or elf in the mountains and forests, playing in the pond like a little sleepy and lazy, beautiful not like a human in the world. Wow! Nightingale's eyes were wide open, and she was 100 times more surprised than when she saw the old immortal just now. She felt that the woman in front of her who was out of the world was the real otherworldly master. Su Buling was also stunned, slightly tilted his head, and didn't understand what kind of fairy art this was. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 346. The sudden appearance of the 2 people naturally disturbed the birds and animals playing by the pool. The birds hanging in the sky scattered into the forest, and the rabbits and squirrels standing under the roots of the trees and watching also slipped into the grass. Nightingale quickly covered her mouth, but unfortunately it was too late, and her eyes couldn't help but show a bit of guilt. Zhongju, who was sitting on the big rock by the water, seemed to have just realized it and looked back with a smile. Master Su. Su Buling was a little embarrassed because he accidentally ruined the beautiful scenery. He raised his hand and chuckled. It's my fault, How did the girl attract these birds and beasts? Zhongju acted like a master, with a calm expression at this time. He stood up and walked up to Su Buling with a soft voice. Flowers, trees, birds, and animals all have spirituality. When I was young, I often collected medicines in the mountains and fields. Over time, I got to know these little guys. They are not afraid of me, even if I change places. Well, it's hard to explain how to call them. Come here, if you want to learn, I can teach you. The art of psychic. Su Buling blinked, really wanting to learn. Although this skill is not very useful, it is much more lethal than a small magic trick when used to make babies and children happy. Nightingale was obviously conquered by Zhongju's miraculous skills, and said with a smile. Sister Zhong, can you teach me? Zhongju pursed his lips and smiled, of course you can, but it's more troublesome and you won't be able to learn it in a few years. Su Buling was not eager for quick success and turned towards the road. It's getting late. Let's find a place to stay first. We'll talk about it when we get back to the ship tomorrow. Zhongju nodded lightly, sat sideways on the horse and walked outside, asking. Have we just seen the old god Kingsyu? Su Buling saw Zhongju's ability and connections, and already regarded this mysterious woman as an expert. He nodded gently. Thank you, girl, for leading the way. I just met you, and my reputation is well deserved. By the way, the girl said that she had a little trouble with Wu Dang. What's going on? When Zhongju heard this, he rolled his eyes, and then his eyebrows showed a bit of helplessness. It's an old story in the world. In Changqing Temple outside Wudang Mountain, there is a real person called Gu Qiu. Have you heard of it? Su Buling was taken aback for a moment and nodded slightly. Of course I've heard of the most beautiful woman in the world, and I've also made some connections with her. Zhongju sighed, walked in front of Su Buling, and said softly. Back then, there was a widespread rumor in the world about the Xianhe Bakui, and women were all proud to be able to paint. I was young at the time and had just started walking around in the world, so I didn't care about it. Later, I happened to meet Su Danking. Oh. Su Buling and Nightingale both became interested, slowed down their horses, and looked sideways at Zhongju. Given the girl's talent and appearance, it's more than enough for her to get into Xian and Bakui. Why didn't she get into painting in the end? Zhongju stirred the hair beside her ears with her fingers, her eyes a little dazed. I didn't pay attention to this matter at first. I happened to meet Su Danking and we had a conversation. Finally, I agreed to let him paint one. After all, it was a matter of increasing my reputation. I wanted to express my gratitude at that time and went to Chang'an. I bought a bottle of good wine. But when I arrived at the agreed place, the eldest lady of the Tang family, that is, Ning Yuhe got there first. Su Buling frowned. He didn't expect such a statement. He looked at Zhongju who was slightly unhappy. This has nothing to do with Ning Yuhe. She was forced to do so. Hearing this tone, Zhongju knew that Su Buling and Ning Yuhe had a very good relationship, so he immediately changed the direction of the attack, and his tone was a little more indignant. A person cannot stand without trust. That Su Danking painted if he wanted to, and if he didn't want to paint, he didn't paint. He lied to me and traveled thousands of miles to do what he promised. Who can bear this anger? After that, he said, the beauty in the world will never come again. It's hard to draw. This doesn't mean that I am not as good as Ning Yuhe. People really shouldn't take these things to heart when they are fighting for fame and wealth. It's like a young man, you don't care about appearance, but if someone really says you are ugly, can you still feel happy? Well. Su Buling had no intention of refuting these words. He was silent for a moment and continued to ask. How did that girl get involved with Wudang Mountain? Zhongju sighed, I was only 15 or 16 at the time. I suffered such a big loss inexplicably, so I was naturally unconvinced. I couldn't find Su Danking, so I wanted to talk to Ning Yuhi. At first, something happened to Ning Yuhi, and I haven't bothered you yet, but later Ning Yuhi went to Wudang Mountain and became a monk, so I wanted to pay him a visit and explain what happened that time. Su Buling nodded slightly. What then? Then. When Zhongju said this, he seemed to think of something sad, his eyes turned a little red. I was still young at the time, and I went to Changqing Watch just to see Ning Yuhi. However, within 2 days of arriving in Wudang, Chen Daozai from Wudang Mountain came over, pointed a sword at me and told me to get out. If I didn't get out, I would die in Changqing. Qingguan, what can I do? I haven't been to Wudang Mountain since then, alas. Su Buletinling frowned and sorted out his thoughts. Su Danking promised to paint for you. Why did I lie to you? I promised you back then. If you don't believe me, ask him. I don't doubt the girl. Well, I was in Chang'an before, but I heard that Su Danking sent away women who came to ask for paintings in the name of buying wine. So what? He could have just said that he couldn't paint. He agreed to paint in person and said he wanted to drink. I ran from Yuzhou to Chang'an and back again. In the end, I didn't find anyone else. Could it be that I was wrong? Zhongju's face was full of grievances, and tears were about to roll down as he spoke. Su Buling raised his hand quickly. Su Danking broke his promise first, so he certainly doesn't blame the girl. But it sounds like this matter has little to do with Ning Yuhi. You must have heard about what happened later. Zhongju pursed his lips. I didn't say anything about her, it's just that Wudang Mountain is meddling in other people's business. Su Buling nodded, chuckled, and said, we should be near Wudang Mountain tomorrow. Since you know Taoist Ning, I will accompany you to Changqingguan. We can become friends after chatting with each other. I will be the middleman, and Chen Daozai will have to wait outside when he comes. After saying that, the three of them galloped to the town outside Jinsi Gorge. The next afternoon, Su Buling brought Nightingale and Zhongju to the foot of Wudang Mountain. What caught their eyes was the chirping of birds in the empty mountains and the rolling clouds in the sky. The scenery of Wudang Mountain in late autumn is still refreshing. Wudang Mountain is a famous feng shui treasure land, both in the market and in the rivers and lakes. There are endless tourists and people from the rivers and lakes on the peaks, and there are also vendors selling souvenirs or fortune tellers pretending to be gods along the way. In fact, Wudang does not tell fortunes or divinations, but fortune tellers are there as long as people believe in them, and it is difficult to drive away the real Taoist priests in Wudang Mountain. After arriving at the foot of Wudang Mountain, because I had greeted Mrs. Lu in advance, the boat stopped directly in the Taiji Lake under Wudang Mountain, and there were guards waiting to welcome them at the official road entrance. Mrs. Lu arrived in Wudang 2 days ago, and went to the golden summit of Tianzi Peak, the main peak of Wudang, with Xiao Xiang to burn incense, and then came back to wait on the boat. After Su Buling learned about it, because he had to cross the territory of Wudang Mountain, he did not return to the boat directly, but first went to Changqing Mountain outside Wudang Mountain. Changqing Mountain is relatively remote and not very high, with only a small path up the mountain. Su Buling rode his horse slowly on the winding mountain trail, his eyes scanning the white clouds outside the mountain, which looked like pink-white steamed buns. Ahem. Su Buling's face changed slightly, and he sat up straighter. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen Ning Yuhi and Man Zer for several months, and he really missed them. Ning Qingyi hadn't seen him since the last kiss, and how to deal with the situation later was also a headache. Unfortunately, Su Buling's headache didn't last too long. After arriving at Changqing Temple on the top of the mountain, he was greeted by a big copper lock. Su Buling led the horse to the front of the small Taoist temple, looked at the spider web under the courtyard wall, and looked around in confusion. Why aren't you here? There is no instant messaging tool in this world, so Nightingale naturally didn't know. She walked to the front of the gate and glanced a few times, then frowned. He, I miss you, Chen Daizai, is this the three Kung Fu masters? Su Buling walked to the gate of the Taoist temple and found a line of big characters on it. His face suddenly darkened. Zhongju knew it would be like this. She was already dissatisfied with Chen Daizai for driving her out of the Central Plains. She walked up to him and took a look. Oh, I didn't expect that Chen Daizai, who is famous all over the world, is like this in private. Nightingale looked at the young master next to her and hesitated to speak. Su Buling frowned and looked for a moment, then turned and walked towards the wind-chasing horse. He took the dragon-patterned long spear wrapped in black cloth from the side of the horse and shouted at the sea of clouds outside the mountain with a loud voice like a bell. Chen Daizai, you stinky cow nose, woo 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 woo. As soon as the words came out, Zhongju, who was watching the show next to her, was stunned. She just wanted to criticize Chen Daizai. She thought Su Buling would just despise him a few times, but she didn't expect him to be so angry. Is it necessary? If Wu Dang god of killing Chen Daizai is called over, Su Buling will not dare to say what will happen. She will definitely be driven out of the Central Plains again. Zhongju raised his hand to cover Su Buling's mouth. Mr. Su, don't be impulsive. The soft and boneless jade hand held her lips, and because of the anxious movement, she almost hugged Su Buling and pulled him back, and the bulging collar was squeezed out of shape. Su Buling's mouth was covered. He raised his hand to hold Zhongju's wrist and pulled it apart. He turned his head and looked slightly cold. Wudan Quanzhen is not interested in women. This shameless stinking bull-nose wants to break the rules by relying on martial arts. I called him out to ask if he is worthy of the Taoist robe on his body. Zhongju pulled Su Buling back hard. That is the Wudan god of killing, one of the top 10 martial arts masters in the world, and the master uncle of Wudan Mountain. So what? Su Buling frowned. The court has conferred a martial arts champion and he doesn't know how high the sky is and how deep the earth is. If I don't make things clear today, I will lead troops to pacify Wudan Mountain tomorrow. It can't be pacified, it can't be pacified. Zhongju explained softly, it may be just a bored and busybody in the world who wrote it. If you vent your anger on Chen Daizai, it will cause a big misunderstanding. Su Buling frowned. Thinking carefully, it made some sense, but his master's door was graffitied with such things. Could it be that all the people in such a big Wudan mountain were blind? Miss Zhong, this matter has nothing to do with you. No. Just when Zhongju was thinking about how to explain, a loud voice came from the sea of clouds in the distance. Which friend has arrived at Wudan? Zhongju didn't expect that Chen Daizai had heard it, and hurriedly whispered. Mr. Su, what happened in the past is over. Although I have some grudges with Chen Daizai is a well-known master after all. His good character is well known to everyone, and I still respect him in my heart. If I invite him here because of such a ridiculous thing, I am afraid I can't deal with it. Su Buling turned his head to look at Zhongju, who looked lonely. After thinking about it, he had to give up the idea of talking to Chen Daizai, and turned to look at the mountain where the voice came from, and said loudly. Chen Daizai, you are really amazing, your swordsmanship is invincible. The mountain was very empty, and the loud voice could be heard from far away. The peaks in the distance were obviously silent for a while, as if they were thinking about whether the sentence was a compliment or a criticism. After a while, a response came. Who is it? Su Buling. Then there was no sound. Su Buling waited for a while, and when he saw that the other party didn't speak, he turned around and led the horse down the mountain to find Mrs. Liu. Zhongju walked beside Su Buling, paying attention to the surrounding movements. After walking a distance and finding that Chen Daizai didn't come over, he was a little confused. Chen Daizai has a bad temper and is unkind. He threatened me back then, you called him a stinky nose, and that's it? What else can I do? I am the Prince of Suwang, and he can't come and beat me up. That's right. Zhongju nodded. Only then did he realize how comfortable it was to have such a disciple around. No one dared to fight back when he helped the master vent his anger. Why is Ningyu he so lucky? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 347. Before I knew it, it was already late autumn, and the weather was obviously getting colder. On the rain-filled Taiji Lake, there are dots of boat lights and fishing sparks. The brightly lit boats are docked outside the buildings on the lakeside. Guards holding swords are walking back and forth in the corridors. The cold wind at night is already chilling, and the maids and guards are all joining in. Got some clothes? On the terrace on the second floor of the building, Mrs. Lu was wearing a shawl and looking up at the Wudane Mountains in the distance. Occasionally, the wind would blow her hair around her ears, and she would shrink her neck and hold her hands to her lips to breathe. Hongluan, it's so cold, why don't you stand here and act like a watcher? Xiao Xianger walked out of the cabin. Because the room was relatively warm, she was only wearing a red single skirt. She had just washed herself. Her long black hair was still wet. When the cold wind blew, she frowned slightly and tightened her collar. Mrs. Lu still looked at the shore and said softly. The guard said that your daughter will go to Wudane Mountain for a walk in the afternoon and will be back in the evening. I will wait here. In fact, they had only been separated for 4 or 5 days in total. Xiao Xianger didn't feel anything at all. When he walked closer, he saw Mrs. Lu feeling restless, leaning against the fence with her arms folded. What? I heard that Su Buling brought back a beautiful girl. Are you so upset that you can't sit still? The tone was obviously Tao Gan. Xiao Xianger and Su Buling are both an old couple. After getting Su Buling's words out in the Sea of Flowers last time, they no longer treat Mrs. Lu as Su Buling's elder. They are just a grievance that they want but dare not take. Little wife. Xiao Xianger hinted many times, openly and secretly, and was actually trying to make connections. Firstly, she didn't want her best friend to remain a widow, and secondly, she wanted to be embarrassed together and couldn't bear it alone. But Mrs. Lu didn't understand, so she just pretended. Just like now, Mrs. Lu's face darkened a bit when she heard Xiao Xianger's words. What nonsense are you talking about? Your son has a high position, so what's the big deal with bringing back a few girls? How can I be upset about this? Xiao Xianger nodded and ignored him. She was not the one who was anxious anyway. The cold wind blew the skirts gently, and the terrace was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Lu said she didn't care, but how could she really not care in her heart? After looking for a while and not seeing Su Buling coming back, Xiao Xianger next to her looked like it's none of her business again, and she couldn't help but feel annoyed in her heart. Looked at Xiao Xianger. Xianger, why do you act like nothing is wrong? I'm his aunt, so I'm naturally not in a hurry, but you're already sleeping on the same bed as Ling. Xiao Xianger's face suddenly turned red, and she could no longer maintain her lazy look. She stood up straight and glared at Mrs. Lu. Why do you speak so freely? Mrs. Lu folded her hands on her waist, as if an elder was looking at a junior, and spoke with sincerity. I'm telling the truth. You and Ling are already married. You say it's a detox, but that's the truth. When you get to Jiangnan and clarify the matter, you have to change your name and call Ling your husband. What if I don't make it clear? I haven't made it clear that your son is also your man. Can you still admit it? Xiao Xianger snorted lightly and looked away. Mrs. Lu walked up to her, raised her hand to hold Xiao Xianger's arm, and said softly. Xianger, there are some things that I, as the elder, cannot control over your child, but you, as the wife, don't take it to heart. Xiao Xianger was a little annoyed and twisted her arm. What, madam, did you take the wrong medicine today? Mrs. Lu held Xiao Xiang'er's arm and did not let go. She taught her daughter-in-law seriously. For a wife, taking care of her husband and raising her children is the most important thing. Her husband is meant to assist her husband and has the responsibility of supervising and correcting her. If you just think about being pampered by your son and do nothing, wouldn't you become like Bao Si or Deji? Disaster. You dash. Xiao Xiang'er was so angry that she raised her hand and slapped Mrs. Lu on the butt. What did you say? Why didn't I care about him? From the moment I saw him, I urged him to have the world in mind and not to start a war in vain. That's the right thing to do. Mrs. Lu didn't mind being beaten and continued to hold Xiao Xiang'er and teach. What I said about cultivating oneself and managing one's family well, you should also pay attention to these things. For example, right now, your child has been out for 5 days, and he kidnapped a girl on the way back. I didn't say it was wrong to bring the girl back, but your child's identity, with his appearance, there must be many women with evil intentions who are interested in him. It's wrong for you not to be worried at all after hearing the news. Aren't you afraid that your husband will be led astray by someone with evil intentions? Xiao Xiang'er always had the idea of detoxifying and did not use her identity as a wife. I didn't think it was anything at first, but when Mrs. Lu said this, she felt a bit jealous in her heart. She looked at Mrs. Lu, who treated her as a spear user. Isn't it the same for you to preach? Why are you pushing me there? I'm here to detoxify him, and we're not married yet. Mrs. Lu bit her lower lip, hesitated again, and shook her head. I have taken care of you enough before. Your son is now an adult and can sleep with you. Spit dash. Xiao Xiang'er almost choked to death at these words. He raised his hand and pinched Mrs. Lu's waist, staring with a pair of apricot eyes. Are you done yet? Do you believe I'll jump off the boat? Mrs. Lu sighed faintly. We love each other as sisters. We are just telling you what is in our hearts. It is obvious that you still can't let go. I didn't say anything to you. Well, I said she is your aunt. In fact, it doesn't matter at all. He has returned to Suzhou now. I shouldn't care about him no matter what the circumstances or reasons. Otherwise, he will annoy me as time goes by. Anyway, you have to say something. Xiao Xiang'er hugged her arms, feeling helpless. You are afraid that he will bother you, but you are not afraid that he will bother me. Mrs. Lu looked like she was "Are you stupid?" and said seriously. You don't know how to talk to your husband? You are from a noble family, and you have such a beautiful face to put on rouge. You have seen how those ladies in Kuishao Street control their husbands, but you have heard about it. When they cover their husbands at night, they say whatever you want. When they cover their husbands, do I have the right to speak? Xiao Xiang'er was angry and amused. When Su Buling pounced on her, she would obey him and not even have the right to talk back. What do you know as a novice? Why don't you try? Do you really think that men still have the heart to listen to you when it's time to sleep? Mrs. Lu thought about it. I heard those ladies talking about family matters, and they all said this: you are so smart, you should figure it out yourself, you can't let me teach you. Xiao Xiang'er turned her head away. I can't think of it. Mrs. Lu looked around a few times, and there was no one around, so she moved closer. I have lived with Linger for a long time, and I know him well. Linger has a good temper and is very caring. When you are alone, you feel wronged, don't be really angry, that kind of aggrieved and difficult to say. Look, he will come to coax you, and listen to everything you say. Xiao Xiang'er stood up a little straighter, put on the airs of the Queen Mother. I, Xiao Xiang'er, will complain to him about being wronged. Do you think I am you? I can't do anything and I will be sour, like a woman in the boudoir. You dash. Mrs. Lu stared, thought about it, and was a little angry, so she patted her blocky best friend on the shoulder. Xiao Xiang'er ignored them and refused to help. Whoever was jealous could speak for themselves. During the chat, the sound of horse hooves finally came from the shore. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 348. Mrs. Lu quickly calmed down and showed her usual dignified and quiet appearance. She glanced towards the shore and saw 3 horses coming under the lights of the street on the shore. In front of them was the waving baby, Nightingale followed beside her, and finally on the bright red face, there sat a woman wearing a long aqua dress. She had bright eyebrows and white teeth, as pretty as flowers. She had a very outstanding appearance and figure, but she looked too charming, like a seductive vixen. Mrs. Lu narrowed her eyes slightly, with a hint of hostility in her eyes involuntarily. She glanced at Xiao Xiang'er and began to provoke. Humph, you really know how to choose. The girls I brought back are prettier than you. Xiao Xiang'er, who was leaning on the fence, looked back after hearing this, and then quickly turned back with a calm expression. Do you think anyone can be the queen? Any decent woman from the world can suppress me. Mrs. Lu thought about it, and the appearance of a person who could be the mother of the country was second to the temperament and education. It was indeed a bit inappropriate to compare women from the world with the former queen mother, so she didn't say much, turned around and walked down the boat building. Greeted on deck. The platform of the building boat leaned against the shore, and the guards got off the boat and took over the horses. Su Buling walked quickly onto the deck. He looked up and saw Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er walking out of the cabin. He chuckled and said, Aunt Lu, Xiang'er, are you still up so late? Xiao Xiang'er looked dignified and grand, walking behind Mrs. Lu. When there were outsiders present, she did not make out with Su Buling, but nodded slightly. Mrs. Lu wore a shawl and walked closer with a tepid expression. I haven't slept until you come back. As she said this, she looked at Zhongju, who was standing behind Su Buling. Who is this girl? With a smile on his face, Su Buling turned around and introduced, this is Miss Zhongju's Hong. I met her near Guan County. She is a doctor with quite clever methods, so I invited her here. Oh! In front of the guests, even if Mrs. Lu was careful, she would not be impolite in her behavior. She bowed slightly and bowed. Miss Zhong has come a long way to meet you, and you will be welcomed from afar. Zhongju went to Fenglingdu after seeing the portrait of his apprentice Chu Chu, and knew that Chu Chu might be in the western region. He happened to see Su Buling's team disembarking from the boat, and followed him at that time. I took a few glances at them from a distance, and I only knew that the 2 women traveling with Su Buling were of good temperament. Now I walked in and took a closer look, only to find that the 2 charming women were both rare beauties in the world. The one in the front was fine, just like the ladies from the aristocratic families, but the one in the back was indeed a bit more glamorous than the others. When she stood there, she felt a little overshadowed by Zhongju, mainly because her aura of arrogance was too strong. Zhongju blinked her eyes and finally understood why Su Buling had a very dull reaction to her appearance. However, she just wanted to accept Su Buling as her apprentice, and had no intention of comparing herself with Su Buling's family members. She also bowed at the moment. Mrs. Lu, Mrs. Xiang'er. Mrs. Lu was the one in charge on the ship. She looked at the sky and called, you slave. It's getting too late. Let's go to the room to rest first. We'll hold a banquet tomorrow for her to wash away the dust. I hope she won't worry too much. It's really troublesome, madam. Zhongjuk gave a polite salute and followed Yunu into the building ship. Su Buling saw that Xiaoxiang was wearing very thin clothes and was worried about catching a cold in the cold night, so he smiled and said, let's go back to the room. We are really tired after running for a few days. Nightingale, go and boil some water down there and take a shower later. After Zhongju left, the smiles on Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er's faces faded a bit. Mrs. Lu pulled away the supported arm and turned to look at Xiao Xiang'er. Xiao Xiang'er looked at the scenery of Taiji Lake with an expression that said, "What you want to say is none of my business." Mrs. Lu had no choice but to think about it, then turned around and walked towards Lu Chuan, saying softly, "Your Majesty, come with me." Su Buling knew that bringing Zhongju back would make Aunt Bao misunderstood. He did not covet her beauty this time. Naturally, he had a clear conscience and followed Mrs. Lu into the cabin. He passed by Xiao Xiang'er who had his back turned and ignored him. The fastest updated computer version : Ah! Xiao Xiang'er, who was pretending to be a cold beauty, suddenly felt a pinch somewhere on her back, and her whole body trembled. She turned around angrily, saw Su Buling smile, and glared fiercely. Mrs. Lu came back after hearing the sound. Su Bulenling followed behind her with pure eyes. Xiao Xiang'er looked like she wanted to eat someone. She couldn't help but secretly muttered in her heart, "I asked you to say it but you didn't say it. I thought you really didn't care." Naturally, Xiao Xiang'er couldn't explain it, so he followed to the cabin. When Mrs. Lu wasn't paying attention, he quickly reached out his hand and pinched Mrs. Lu behind her, hoping to frame her. It's a pity that Su Bulenling didn't have any good eyesight and immediately frowned. "Xiang'er, what are you doing?" Mrs. Lu was pinched in the back. She turned around angrily and glared at Xiao Xiang'er who was pretending to look at the scenery. Xiao Xiang'er was so choked that she no longer maintained a dignified posture. She lifted up her embroidered shoes and stepped on Su Buling's feet, then ran back to the house with a dong dong dong. "This Xiang'er." Mrs. Lu folded her hands on her waist, shook her head helplessly, walked slowly to Su Buling's room, sat down at the round table, and poured a cup of tea. "Your Majesty, close the door." Su Buling closed the door, sat down in front of Mrs. Lu, and started squeezing her shoulders. "What's wrong, Aunt Lu?" Mrs. Lu twisted her shoulders and let him go if she couldn't get away. She looked at the teacup in her hand and said softly, "Who is that girl? She's pretty. It's only been a few days, but she's quite capable." A very familiar tone. Su Buling had long been accustomed to it. He raised his hand and gently touched her soft shoulder, smiling. "She's really a doctor. She knows a lot about beauty. Aunt Lu has also seen her complexion. Her skin is almost the same as that of a nightingale." Mrs. Lu must have seen it just now. When she heard this, she was half believing and half doubting. "Her face is indeed tender. I thought it was natural." No matter how good your natural foundation is, you still need to take care of it. Aunt Lu asked Master how to keep healthy. Master is a Taoist priest. She is definitely not as good as a doctor in terms of beauty. Really? Mrs. Lu was naturally not fooled by these words. She took a sip of tea and said seriously, "What's her background? It's not my business. If you only know her, it doesn't matter if she's a pretty girl. The palace doesn't need a pair of chopsticks. I'm just afraid that some women with bad intentions will enter the backyard, which will harm the whole family." Su Buling was a little helpless. "I didn't say what I want her to do. I just think she has some skills. If she has real skills, please go back and be a guest. Doctors are not too many." Mrs. Lu pondered for a while. Helping beauty is not a big skill. "I'm afraid she can't be a guest of the Su Palace. At most, she can be a female doctor in the palace." Su Buling smiled lightly, hesitated a little, and repeated what Zhongju said about impotence. After all, this is a major matter related to the continuation of the family line, and there is nothing to be said in private. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 349. I don't have medical skills, and I don't dare to say whether it's true or false. It's okay if it's false, but if it's true, something big will happen, so I brought her back. When Mrs. Lu heard these words, her face naturally became anxious. How can this work? You don't even have a child. Su Buling shook his head. I don't know if it's true or not yet. Even if it's true, judging from Miss Zhong's tone, I'm 100% sure that she'll be fine. Don't worry. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and became a little annoyed. Same for you, Xiang'er has such a big medicine jar in front of you, but you don't know how to seize the time to detoxify it. It's been almost a year and it hasn't been completely detoxified. What if it takes too long and it really wears down your body? Well. Su Buletin spread his hands a little helplessly and wanted to say, you and Xiang'er sleep in the same bed every day, what can I do, but he definitely couldn't say this. After all, Mrs. Lu was worried about Su Buling's health, so she didn't bother her immediately. She raised her hand and pushed Su Buling's shoulder. What are you still doing? Go and detoxify quickly. I will stay in your room from now on. Don't share the bed with Xiang'er. Get detoxified quickly. Su Buling sat up a little straighter, and after making sure that Mrs. Lu's expression was serious and not joking, she declined slightly. I'm afraid Xiang'er won't agree, and it won't work if he solves it too quickly. People are not made of iron. Mrs. Lu's expression was slightly strange. She pursed her lips and glanced at Su Buling a few times. She still couldn't hold it back and poked Su Buling's chest with her green-white jade finger. You are a man, why do you care whether she agrees or not? She is not the queen mother anymore. When a woman marries, she obeys her husband. It is not what you say. She has no courage at all. How can she be a prince in the future? Also, it's not like I don't care about your body and bones. You know, it's no different than being beaten with iron. You can beat 1,000 people, but you can't deal with a weak woman. Seeing Mrs. Lu's serious yet weird look, Su Buletin felt strange in her heart and said softly. Well, she can't stand it, it's not that I can't stand it. Why can't she stand it? Women are not afraid of that. She is in her 20s, the age when she has children. She has such a good figure and is so lively all day long. It doesn't look like she can't stand it. Mrs. Lu's face turned a little red, but she still said seriously, at worst, I will serve her tea and water tomorrow, just don't let the servants see it. It's more important to detoxify, it's best to detoxify a big fat boy, let's see if she commits suicide. Su Buling rubbed his fingers and held it in for a long time without saying anything. He nodded lightly. I'll try. Go quickly, go quickly. Mrs. Lu raised her hand, as if to scare people away. After a while, Su Buling arranged for guards to inquire about Ning Yuhi's whereabouts, then took a shower and changed into a clean robe, and walked to the cabin behind the building ship. Passing by Zhongju's guest house, I listened carefully and found that Zhongju was not afraid of strangers and had already fallen asleep. He didn't interrupt, and carefully followed the instructions of the considerate little Aunt Lu, and came to the house where Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er lived together. The maids lived at the stern of the ship. Mrs. Lu's room was at the very back. It was very spacious and fully furnished. It was a long road, and there were chessboards, flutes, pipa and other things to pass the time in the room. Mrs. Lu's half-finished robe was placed on the soft bed. Squeak. Su Buling opened the door softly, closed it again, and bolted the door. A glance at the film showed that Xiao Xiang'er had already fallen asleep in the back room, and Mrs. Lu had a light outside. Fastest update mobile version. Since the first detoxification, it was the first time for him to go back to the room openly through the front door to see the baby. Su Buling was still a little unaccustomed to it, so he walked to the table, picked up the candlestick, opened the bead curtain and entered the back room. After all, we are on a ship. The space in the back room is not very big. Behind the screen is the bed, covered with a warm yellow thin quilt. There is a standing cabinet and dressing table next to it. There is nothing else except for the first time. Xiao Xiang'er was sleeping on the inside. She was lying on her side on the pillow facing the wall. She was not asleep yet. When she heard the sound of someone coming in, she said calmly, "Are you enough?" Su Buring blinked, placed the candle lamp on the dressing table next to him, and untied his robe. When Xiao Xiang'er saw that Mrs. Lu was silent, she said lightly, "What? Su Buling didn't listen to you, just to bring the girl on board? I told you that you can't control it, so you have to preach. Aren't you making yourself uncomfortable?" Su Buletinling opened the quilt and lay down comfortably on the warm quilt. Xiao Xiang'er also moved a little further inside to get out of the way. She wanted to continue talking, but found that someone was hugging her waist. "What are you doing?" Xiao Xiang'er turned around slightly annoyed, and happened to see Su Buling squinting his eyes slightly with a somewhat scrutinizing gaze. His expression froze slightly, and then he became flustered and pushed anxiously. "You bastard, are you crazy? This is Hongluan's room." Su Buling hugged Xiao Xiang'er, covered her with the quilt, let her lean on his shoulder, and looked at the curtain above. "Aunt Lu asked me to come here to detoxify." Xiao Xiang'er's face turned red and she twisted and twisted restlessly. "Is she crazy? You're not mad. Baby, be good. It's useless to push you to call me brother later." Xiao Xiang'er's almond-shaped eyes widened slightly, and she immediately became honest. She pursed her lips, leaned on Su Buling's shoulder angrily, and said softly, "Who do you think I am, that you come when she asks you to? I didn't agree. If you do it again, I will die for you." Su Buling smiled warmly, hugged the warm baby, and breathed a sigh of relief. "It's been so long, it's meaningless to make trouble again. Call me husband from now on. We have arrived in Chu, and the journey is halfway through. When we reach Jiangnan, we will get used to it." Padash. Xiao Xiang'er raised her little fist and hit Su Buling on the shoulder. "What if my sister doesn't agree? People can't go back on their words. If you say you want to exchange lives, you have to exchange lives? At most, I will wait for you for decades at Nahi Bridge. Anyway, it's impossible for you to come now. You promised me that I would call you to detoxify, not just come whenever you want." Su Buling smiled lightly, tilted his head and looked at Xiao Xiang'er, who was trying to be stubborn. "Baby, can we?" Xiao Xiang'er looked serious. "No, I don't agree today." "Really not agree?" "Yes." "Okay, sleep." Su Buling let go of his hand, turned to face the outside and closed his eyes. Xiao Xiang'er's arm that was supporting her face was gone. She looked at Su Buling's back blankly. After thinking for a while, she turned around and ignored him. Silence for a moment. "Baby, are you calm? Oh, why are you so shameless?" "I couldn't sleep anyway, so I came here." There was a rustling sound, and as they came and went, it was already dawn. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 350. In the long autumn night, the vast Dongting Lake is full of pleasure boats and fishing boats. There is a lakeside square on the outskirts of Junshan Island. It was originally the place where the Junshan Cao family welcomed guests. In the past, countless wanderers came here every day to visit or learn skills. As the Cao family retired from the world, the martial arts stage on the square was naturally abandoned, and now it has been turned into a stage. The houses around the square have become a small market, with many inns and wine shops, crab shops everywhere, and various specialties on the shores of Dongting Lake, which is not much different from the scenic spots of later generations. The Yueyang Tower across the lake is nearly 10 miles away, but the lake is as flat as a mirror, and you can still see a sea of lights in the distance. Under the crescent moon, Ning Qingyi stood on the top of the high tower by the lake, looking at the various shapes and colors on Dongting Lake. She was still wearing a white dress that was whiter than snow, with black hair draped over her back. She looked pure and elegant, like a white lotus that had fallen into the mortal world. She held a Qingfeng sword in her hand, which added a bit of chivalry to her fairy spirit. But her eyes, like a clear spring, were a little absent-minded at this moment. It had been almost a year since Ning Qingyi left Hutai Street in shame and anger after being kissed by Su Buling on the 16th day of the first lunar month. Her mixed emotions had long since calmed down. Although she was still angry about being taken advantage of, the other party had saved her life after all. What else could she do except pretend that it had not happened? After Ning Qingyi left Chang'an, she returned to Changqing Temple in Wudang Mountain. She wanted to continue to depend on her master, practice martial arts to the pinnacle, and then go to avenge her mother. But her master, who had always stayed at home, had gone somewhere and only left her a letter, asking her not to run around when she came back. Later, she heard from Senior Wudang about Su Buling's apprenticeship. She had a junior brother out of nowhere. The night wind blew her hair. Ning Qingyi narrowed her eyes slightly, and was obviously a little annoyed. She had already drawn a clear line with that daring guy. How come they were involved again? How should the senior sisters and brothers get along with each other in the future? However, in the martial arts world, the master's orders are the heaven. The master wants to accept a disciple, and she, as the eldest sister, naturally cannot disobey. She can only reluctantly accept this fact. She also thought that when Su Buling came to Wudang Mountain, she would give him a good warning. If he dared to tell the master about kissing her, she would stab him with a sword. She just lived in the mountain for a few days, but she didn't wait for the master and Su Buling, but waited for a piece of news in the martial arts world. The Eagle Tower was looking for 4 jade artifacts circulating in the martial arts world for the Tongtian treasure book and set its sights on the Cao family. Ning Qingyi asked the masters of Wudang about the authenticity of Tongtian Baodian. It was true, but it was definitely false that learning it would make one invulnerable to swords and guns and immortal. It should be the top-notch martial arts routine. The rumor was too mysterious. Ning Qingyi actually wanted to find it. After all, if a Jianghu person wanted to become more powerful, apart from talent and diligence, the only thing left was to search for superior martial arts moves. Ning Qingyi wanted revenge, but her enemies were 2 giants that made it difficult for people to compare with them. Needless to say, the imperial court could barely kill Zhang Xiang, and there were a bunch of more powerful culprits behind him. The other one was the leader of the Eagle Building, her ruthless and ungrateful biological father. Ning Qingyi hated that biological father even more than the imperial court that killed him. The imperial court's Iron Eagle hunting deer was a different position. It was true that the official killed the bandit and there was a blood feud, but at least it made sense. And her biological father, since she could remember, had been obsessed with high positions and wealth, and rarely returned home. Until the day when the village was reduced to ruins, her mother was still waiting outside the village with her. In order to protect her from escaping, her mother was killed by the wolf guards. Before she died, she was still wearing the hairpin given by the unfaithful man. But that man has never visited the grave to this day, and is still thinking about gathering a force to plot a big plan. He didn't care when he was alive. After his death, his fame was cut off, so he gathered a group of people to oppose the court. Who cares? Now the Eagle Tower wants to search for 4 jade artifacts, one of which is placed in the ancestral hall of the Cao family on Junshan Island. When she escaped from Shu, it was the time when the Iron Eagle hunting deer was at its peak. Everyone in the world was silent, and those who dared to help her were basically dead. When she was desperate, the only one who helped her was the Cao family on Junshan Island. Cao Kujian, the head of the Cao family, was already trapped in the center of the vortex. He took the risk of being discovered by the court and secretly took her to Wudang Mountain. Under the protection of King Sujinran, she lived safely until now. If it weren't for the help of the Cao family, Ning Qingyi would have been like those children whose parents were killed by the wolf guards. I don't know what I have fallen into. Therefore, after learning that the Eagle Tower was searching for the jade pendant, Ning Qingyi came to Junshan Island. Jianghu people know how to repay kindness. The Cao family saved her life that year, so how can they not repay it now that they are in trouble? And if Li Hanzhong dared to come, even if she gave up her life, she would have to give her mother who died in the wilderness a slap in the face. However, at the top of the tower, Ning Qingyi looked in the direction of Yueyang Tower and sighed softly. After waiting for so long, Eagle Tower only sent a few messengers to contact the Cao family, and none of the real owners came. The Cao family has repeatedly stated that they have withdrawn from the Jianghu and will not intervene in the disputes in the Jianghu, and there is no sign of fighting at present. And that lecherous playboy who had already returned to Suzhou came to Chu for unknown reasons. According to the news just spread by Lin Yuzong of Hutu Mountain, he had arrived at Jinsi Gorge a few days ago. Lin Yuzong is a leader among the younger generation in Chu. People all say that he has the potential to be the best in martial arts. According to Lin Yuzong's description, Lin and the contemporary champion Su Buling had a decisive battle with the Kingxiu Genren of Xi'an village. After exchanging 3 moves, they felt sorry for not meeting each other earlier. It seems that Su Buling's martial arts have recovered and he is probably on par with Lin Yuzong. Ning Qingyi couldn't beat Su Buling before. After practicing hard for nearly a year, his power has doubled. He thought he could at least tie with Su Buling. Now it seems that it is probably 30-70. It stands to reason that Su Buling should meet her when he arrives in Chu. But she has important matters and a personal blood feud now, so she doesn't want to involve Su Buling. Ning Qingyi hooked the hair by her ear and looked back at the 72 peaks of Junshan. It is rumored that several masters of the Eagle Tower have arrived in Yueyang. If the Cao family does not give in, they will come to the door and rob them sooner or later. The Cao family of Junshan Island has sealed their swords for 10 years, and the whole family no longer practices martial arts. Once the sword box is opened and the sword is held again, it is impossible to retreat. But without holding the sword, how can they stop the bandits in the Eagle Tower? At present, some old friends of the Cao family have spontaneously come to serve as the door gods of the Cao family, but it is still unknown who came to the Eagle Tower. If a few helmsmen came, it would be fine. If it was Li Hanzhong who came in person, if she was not there, these friends would definitely not be able to stop them. Ning Qingyi thought about it and gave up the idea of going out to look for him. She jumped off the tower and disappeared by the lake.